Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. In this episode, we're going to explore how to shape and sustain a healthy, high-performing culture during times of significant change. My guest today is someone who brings deep insight into the human side of leadership, especially during rapid growth. She's the Vice President of People and Talent at Roofer. She's been a catalyst behind their cultural evolution, building teams through both intentional design and real-world learning. With a background spanning recruitment, HR, and organizational design, her leadership reflects a rare balance of strategy, heart, and adaptability. With that, meet my guest, Jen Pax, and welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so excited to be here. Yay.
Likewise, I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And before we get into it, we had a really energizing chat recently. And one of the things that stood out was how you see emotional regulation, both in parenting and leadership as a foundational skill during transition. So I'd love to start there. So what are the crucial considerations that leaders need to make during times of massive change and growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think just prefacing it by I'm a parent of two girls. One is 7 and one is 10. And my younger one has some challenges with emotional regulation. So there's a lot of personal tools that I pulled into this as well. But when leaders are working on something so critical, there's a lot of change management that goes into the change, right? As you scale, there's going to be change, and people have a lot of feelings or emotions around that because it could affect them. It could affect their day-to-day, what they're going to be doing in their job. It could affect them monetarily, which again has other ripple effects. So leaders really need to think about not just how am I going to make this change happen, but how is this change going to potentially have a ripple effect into how other employees are going to feel? And of course, how would they work after that too?
What does it look like to take in consideration the feelings of an employee? Because how fast things are going, the focus is on getting through the operational day-to-day tasks and executing this change initiative. Maybe it's a big project, maybe it's a smaller change within an organization. What would that look like in actually taking consideration the feelings of employees?
Yeah, I actually have leaders think about it in baby steps. So it's from that, okay, when does that first conversation need to happen about getting employees mentally even ready for that change? And in that first conversation, what all do you need to tell them then? And how do you think they're going to react? It's almost like contingency planning on that end. Do you feel, and so I'll ask a lot of follow-up questions of, do you feel like anyone's going to potentially be upset about this change? Do you think they're going to be angry about this change? Do they're going to be sad about this change? So we'll work through kind of all the different emotional outcomes that could happen to get the leader really prepared for it. What I like to have them do is have almost these like segue sentences. So if an employee does respond emotionally, either angry, sad, confused, hurt, any of those, then they have that first transitional sentence ready to go in the back of their brain so that they can actually have a conversation with them. And they're not themselves, the leader, reacting emotionally as well, because that's really important, that you need to stay in this neutral position yourself as a leader. You can't be dragged into an emotion or get defensive and be combative as well, depending on what you're getting back from that employee. So starting off with those baby steps of, okay, this is the first conversation. after that first conversation, what's the second conversation look like? So you're almost mentally mapping it out for the leader, this whole change. And because there's a lot of communication that needs to go into that change, which affects the emotional regulation side of it a lot. I would say that's the crux of the emotional regulation side is how did you communicate this? And if you communicate it well, or if you communicate it poorly.
Mm. I love this building an understanding around the emotions that might be being experienced from those in your organization who are undergoing large change initiatives by reflecting on what needs to be communicated to them, what could be their experience to what they hear, and then also just planning, okay, if they're experiencing this range of whatever that might be, a range of questions, a range of feelings, this is how you could respond. And that can help you to be more regulated, more neutral in that moment. I think of you have a 7 and a 10-year-old. I have a 7 and 10-year-old.
Yeah.
And I can see the impact of when I'm not fully present or when emotions get the best of me. And it tends to prolong the challenge that we might be experiencing, whatever that scenario is. It could intensify emotions. It could also just not lead to any constructive outcome. And what is the value for a leader from your perspective? And maybe even sharing, when have you seen leaders perhaps getting lost in their emotions, right? Maybe being combative. What is the ripple effect that can do? Like, why do we want to, as leaders, why would we want to maintain that sense of groundedness or neutrality in our interactions?
Yeah. This is actually a life lesson that I learned as I've grown in leadership myself, where you have I have teams under me at this point, and the teams will come to me very potentially sometimes very hopped up on some kind of either very excited about something that's coming up or very concerned or angry or they're just very high emotion about something that's going on. And I've learned that if I mirror that behavior back to them, it only escalates the temperature in the room and it never solves the problem. So I've had this on occasion where one one of the employees on my team will come to me and say, I'm having a problem with this person. And they'll mention all the bad things. And if I start piling on, like, yeah, like they were awful, like they were doing this, like they shouldn't do this, that's not solving the problem. They're coming to me as their leader saying, hey, I'm having this problem. I want to acknowledge their feelings. Thank you for bringing this to me. Let's talk through it. And if I start to engage in that way and pile on, I'm not helping that person to even work through the problem themselves. They're staying in kind of that reverse mode almost, that negativity mode, and they're not able to move forward. They're not able to be curious, and they're just going to kind of sit in it. As a leader, like I'm getting more of, I'm feeling a lot more of these conversations, and I'm recognizing myself as, whoa, like either after that conversation or even sometimes during that conversation, I'll recognize, did I propel the conversation forward? Did I get this kind of curiosity and move to a solution? Or did I maybe commiserate with the employee? And that's also a balance of how friendly and supportive are you versus how are you mentoring and coaching as well, which is a hard challenge as a leader to figure out which one you should be in at a time sometimes.
Mhm. I had this picture coming up in my mind while you were speaking around how people are coming to you as a leader to find some type of resolution or some type of direction. I've been doing a lot of work researching and studying indigenous methods of communication, conflict resolution, and really creating a sense of community. And these elders within these communities were the leaders that people would come to do the exact same thing. And if we think of ourselves as leaders, as those that people come to seeking support in some way, I think it's reframes, it changes that. How am I showing up in the moment? Like, how am I actually being present? How are my emotions influencing this situation? How are my biases? Like, why am I responding the way that I'm responding? These types of questions can be incredibly valuable in a number of ways. And it can be incredibly hard when the pace of work is moving so fast. I know at Roofer, you're going through a hyperscaling mode right now and integrating new AI technology, experimenting with various different iterations on the platform. How do you sustain your own ability to be self-reflective and aware in those moments, and having two kids, a full family life, all of these things? I know from a lot of the people that we worked with, that can be overwhelming. How do you sustain yourself? What are some of the practices that you do? How do you approach that in your day-to-day leadership?
Yeah. Are you asking more about how I approach getting through those conversations and making those conversations more fruitful? Or are you asking more at the end of the day, what, or even during the day, what am I doing to stay grounded? Or maybe both?
Yeah, actually, I would say the latter. What are you doing to stay grounded so that you can be self-reflective? So you were talking about how when people are to me, am I commiserating with them? Am I helping them find a resolution? That takes a degree of awareness, and it takes a bit of a degree of being grounded. How do you sustain that in a busy and personal life?
Yeah. My brain, because we are doing so many things at once, I feel like my brain moves. It's almost like a rat's in here, right? And it's just like going as quickly as possible. For me, it's actually about slowing my brain down. And when somebody is saying something to me and they're coming to me with a problem, sometimes I'll actually just repeat it back to them to give my brain an extra second so I can think a little bit more about it. I also, in some of the instances for this, maybe we don't work out a final solution, but we work out, okay, what's the next step that we can have? That's helpful, I think, too, because then it's maybe not as big of a solution for the moment. But I ask a lot of questions. I think that's the part of it. Like I think as a leader, your best asset is to get as much context as possible. And if there is perspective that you can have or that you can have like with a person on your team, that's something that you should facilitate more of. So usually when somebody's coming to me with a problem, I'm asking like, I don't know, probably like 7 or 8 questions if I had to guess. And I think that helps because it helps me to gain more perspective, but it's also very conversational of, oh, like what happened when you said this? How did they react? How did that make you feel? There's a lot of those back and forth questions. And sometimes that actually helps the employee to work out a solution on their own. It's like magic. And they talk so much. And I just asked a question and then they're just talking.
You know, that magic that happens when, the people we're interacting with come to their own solutions. I find it can be a common occurrence if you create the space for people to pause, to reflect on what they're doing, the situation that they're in, the context, your context, the other people's perspectives and context. And that in of itself can come to resolution and also builds incredible life skills. And I think as a leader too, I think that's such a great skill and technique to pass on. That's simple asking a question, okay, or even just reflecting back, because I think it's about creating that space. I've noticed as well, especially when I'm noticing I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody, or in the moment in a meeting, something's brought up that maybe is not what I wanted to hear, or it's testing something that I said. I'll take a moment and just reflect back. So this is what I heard you say. And it just creates a bit of that space, like you said, to pause and to take stock in it. And and as a leader, you are, and I know we were talking about this, you're working with many teams and you're focused on team building right now.
Mhm.
And you approach it a little bit like you said, as a stew, right? You love cooking.
I love that.
And the way you're thinking of it is like layering roles and personalities and dynamics. And can you walk us through this metaphor a little bit of team building as as being a chef with a nice fine stew and how it applies to scaling thoughtfully during this sort of hyper growth that you're going through?
Yeah. Yeah. I love cooking. One of my favorite things to cook in the winter is beef bourguignon, but I don't know. I maybe like dumb it down a little bit. I don't know how to explain it like in a way, but one of the things I love about it in a lot of different studios is you are building from a base. So you have a foundation where you're like maybe you add some butter and you're sauteing some shallots and some onions. So that's your foundation that you're starting with. So that could be your founders where they're setting the tone for what what are we building here and why are we building it? That vision of it. And then you're starting to add in potentially some additional spices, or I actually personally like to add in the meat at this time. And so I like to sear the meat. That meat is that mid layer manager almost, because they're going to take on so many responsibilities. They're oftentimes that make or break of the meal or of the company as well, because they're playing this role where it is a player and a coach. They're usually a subject matter expert that gets promoted into a manager role. So again, that's the meat of the company is there, and there should be a good chunk of them. And then you're also thinking about, after you've seared the meat, we'll say, going with this metaphor, maybe you're adding in wine or chicken stock as well. And this is the part that's adding additional flavors. So this part when you're building a company is I'm adding in some specializations. Maybe I want to have on the marketing team a product marketing person or a creative director or something that wasn't there, and it's not a generalist that can do everything. It's somebody who can do something very specific. Their role is very specific but very impactful. The other side of that, the other kind of liquid kind of aspect, I will say, is maybe it's adding to the leadership team. So this changes the consistency of the company. They all have an impact on the different culture, how people are working. They're bringing in new skills maybe that they have had from previous companies, which is a whole other concept too, where you're throwing something in that changes the entire consistency of the meal, right? That liquidy part. And it's very similar though to a company where you need to have a lot of different ingredients to make something tasty or to make something work. You can't just have bland chicken. I don't know how many people like bland chicken. I personally don't, but I'll eat chicken, but I have to have spices on it. So I think it's a very, I don't know, like I've probably lost the analogy at this point, but I think that's how I think about building companies is everybody has some kind of impact on the company. And so it's really the job of the people, like the people team and the talent team, to see how is that going to fit within the company and how is that going to add value? How is that going to potentially change things? And there's a lot of kind of push and pull there too, especially as the person gets more into their role and is seasoned, we'll say. Horrible.
You know,
Sorry.
I actually love it. The thing that came up for me is I think this is it's I love how we're talking how wine and fine cuts of beef and seasoning isn't a leadership discussion because I think the two go hand in hand here. But the importance there's in many leadership discussions there's this sort of people versus process, And if you think about it too, cooking, you can separate the ingredients from the process at which you put all the ingredients together and how you move through it. They're tightly intertwined. And I think the way that this metaphor illustrates is that it's so important to be thoughtful in the foundation that you build, the quality of the ingredients, the different types of the ingredients, to plan for that, the timing of these ingredients and how they're prepared and how they're put together. And so that really brings together and shows how interconnected those aspects are. And and then there's this whole aspect of the culture of the organization that you can expand it beyond the culture of the kitchen and the qualities that get brought into the values, the mission, the direction, etc. All of it flavors the outcome. And there's this I'm interested from your perspective too. Right now, there's some conventional team building approaches have shared this sort of norming, forming stage of teams, norming, storming, and then performing, and then finishing off with a journeying, closing off the life cycle and maybe breaking off teams. And at this time of massive change, how do you manage through that? I think a lot of people are scared around their roles in different companies and the state of tech as well. I know tech has just been shaken up in a massive way. So, in particular, how do you support people through these massive transitions and how do you embrace that as a culture, as an organization? All these changes that are inevitable to come, all these transitions that are inevitably coming and that have always been, but maybe right now it's just amplified.
Yeah. The first thing we did was actually figure out how we were going to name what was happening. And so we actually had a manager coach come in, and we've done multiple cohorts since then. We basically have us just have a shared language for this. So we actually just do the forming, the storming, and the norming side of it. The way that the coach explained it to me was or our cohort, it was more of a cyclical thing because even after you're norming, then you could form something again, like something offshoots, right? And so I think the very first thing that we did was actually talk about, yeah, what are we doing right now? Let's recognize just where we're at, you know? And I even have that conversation with my team as we're adding another person to the team. Okay, we're reforming again because roles and responsibilities might change a little bit. This new person coming on board, they're going to take on a piece of your pie and you're going to have some kind of emotional reaction to that, most likely, because everyone does, right? We, Roofer, and some of the other startups I've been at have started. I've come in and it's been very small. Again, everybody's a generalist. And then you start to specialize, which means your role, like the amount of things you do, gets smaller and smaller. But it doesn't mean that your impact has to get smaller and smaller. But that's the way that people's brains equate it sometimes. And so there's a whole part of the forming aspect of how do you get people to understand this potentially might be painful, some kind of emotional side of it, but we're going to get through it. If as long as we communicate with each other, there's going to be some kind of resolution here and we're going to get to a good way of working. But it might be challenging. You might have to have a little bit more courage, some vulnerability, some empathy. There's so many different things that kind of get thrown at you. And so you have to have that level of trust, I think, too. That goes back to the foundational side of the stew or the company, where if you don't have that set up or it's been eroded, the whole process of forming, starting, and norming is just going to be potentially a disaster. Because, when people are reacting emotionally, they're going to react and there's going to be additional assumptions that are made. And yeah, just not best.
Yeah, yeah. There's just so much that I think is coming up right now from the sense of uncertainty that's there. And so, from a cultural cohesion, building that cultural cohesion, at Roofer? I know there's been about 100 new hires in the time or more at this point since you joined the team. How do you foster, like, how, from a leadership perspective, how is that sense of cultural cohesion, trust, support during this time in the teams and supporting them through these cycles of forming and renewal that's always happening? How do you foster a culture that supports it? What are some of the key elements that you found that are just have been pivotal?
I think one thing that we've done, and I bring this into every company, but I think we've done it even like up a level here. Employees sometimes feel like they're screaming into a void where like they're saying like all the feedback and no one is hearing anything and nothing is being done. And so I think the first thing that we did was we created a few different avenues for employees to give us feedback. And then after we got the feedback, we actually actioned on it. Like we did something. And employees, I think that was the first level of trust for us. I came in November 2023. We ran an annual survey in January. I took those results to heart. One of our lowest scores where I don't know how my performance is being managed. I was like, okay, I have my marching orders. We're going to make sure that every team has career levels. We have very clear competencies. We're going to run a more formalized performance review process where every manager is going to give employee feedback. They're going to know where they stand. And employees responded very positively to that. They're like, I feel like I've been heard. And I think that's the very first step you need to take.
And you've seen leadership teams with radically different backgrounds, some from big enterprises that you've worked with, others from with startup grit that you've been sharing here.
Yeah.
And so when you bring together, actually looking at, like, what are some of the leadership challenges or challenges emerged from this that kind of diversity in leadership styles?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of challenges when you're bringing people from different backgrounds into the mix. The very first one that pops to mind to me is different working styles. Because what would work at a 10-person startup is probably not going to work at a 50 to 100 to 200 to what about 2000. So if you have a blended mix of leaders, which we do from various stages of a company, various sizes of company, they're coming with maybe different ways of working. Oh, we did this at my last company. Let's do it here. And that suggestion might work for some of the aspects, but also other leaders have to say, hey, thank you for the suggestion. That's not really going to work here right now because of X, Y, and Z. And that's where your context needs to come into play. So that's also where a lot of leadership teams start to butt heads because you've hired these very smart people who have led organizations or led departments before. So they are leaders and they're coming with suggestions because they're leaders and they're suggesting things. But then you're going to have these conflicts that are inevitably going to arise. And so I think the other side of that is not only the different working styles, but also the different ways that you're going to communicate and the guardrails are going to put into place of how should decisions get made. Are we a democracy? Are we all voting for this? Does the CEO get the final say? Does this one person over here get more weight on their vote because of X, Y, and Z? Who knows? So I think that's also just the general ways of working are helpful when you have all those different leaders in the mix.
Yeah, it's really interesting thinking about this transparency that comes through surveys, the authentically listening to your peers, the employees that you work that perhaps your direct reports even, and just the organization at large is having this open line of communication and this awareness building. And even within a team, looking at what is the working style? How do people approach their work? What is optimal? Having these types of conversations. Is that something that's like, how do you foster that at Roofer? How do you Are there training initiatives that you bring in to support this? Or is this something that is embraced in the culture? Maybe you could build on that a little bit. I'm really interested to know, how do you foster that awareness within the teams in terms of how do we work effectively together? And how does our style mesh with others, for example?
Yeah. I mean, we do a lot of different ways actually. So we do have the manager coaching side again to get the meat of the employees on board with this. And there's a lot of training there. In addition to that, though, we have a leadership training or a leadership strategic meeting coming up soon. We're going to have a third party facilitator come in and run that for us, which will be the very first time that this is happening. I'm super excited about it because that means that everyone in the room is participating and we have a person there that is going to set kind of the stage for some of these things as well. The other side of it though, it really does come from our founder, Rishi, like our CEO. He has set the tone of we're all in this together. We want this to work. We have the team we need, so we've got to make it work. So how do we do that, team? And so he himself asks a lot of questions too, which I think helps us to feel like we're working on the problem together.
Mhm. Yeah, just I've read recently that there's the qualities that leaders have are contagious, for better or for worse. And I think this aligns so much to the conversation that we've been having now. If we're getting completely overwhelmed by our emotions, or if we're shutting down or getting aggressive, that is contagious. That permeates into our teams, right? And if we bring it back to that bit of a metaphor of being a community elder, almost in a sense, this community leader, where people are coming to us for resolution, they're looking to us, they're watching us, they're feeling how we're approaching situations, and they're going to emulate that. And it's so important to have that grounded leadership and that curious leadership. And it's in different styles, right? Everybody has their own style, and that's great. But then it's like, how does that mesh with the overall, how does that impact the organization? And it does really start at the top. And if we were to zoom out now just a little bit, how did you find yourself getting interested in people and culture and working in the space? What drew you to this kind of work, like the work that you're doing, where you're working with countless numbers of people and emotions and feelings and teams, and what, what drew you to this type of work?
So I honestly fell into it. I was not looking for recruiting. Like I did not go to school for recruiting. If you look on LinkedIn, I went to school for opera. Like I was a singer and I didn't even know recruiting was a job. I didn't know people operations was really a job. And but I got into my very first startup and I remember just the conversations that I would have with hiring managers because I was on the recruiting side at that point, and the conversations I would have and just understanding what this hire would mean to them and then what that would mean to the team and then what that would mean to the organization. That was infectious, honestly. And I have to say I'm a little competitive and I liked the idea of filling a lot of roles and hiring a lot of people and getting to know more and more smart people. So that's what kind of first got me into startups. And then I had seen different I think different HR styles as I was continuing on the recruiting path and kind of wanted to just dip my toe in it and just be like, I have a lot of conversations with hiring managers about their teams already. What else could I learn? What other problems could I potentially solve by talking with them about career progression or talking with them about what's a challenge or what's a piece of feedback that you're giving your employee right now? And honestly, I became addicted to asking those questions. And at the end of the day, it's it's a rush when you get like a hiring manager like after the meeting you had, and they're like, I went and had this conversation. It went really well. Like everything that you said, kind of the prepping and doing this and this, like really helped. And I feed off of that. It's I like happiness monster almost, like gobbling up that happiness and be like, this is great. The reverse of it is true too. That's the other, like this is the downside to it is there's a lot of tough conversations. I've had to fire a lot of people in my career as well. And that's hard. And that I lose sleep at night on those things. But I think the happiness and the urge to want to help people and support people and see solutions, I think that weighs the negativity of the bad stuff that I have to do too. The bad but necessary stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and maybe if we could stay there for a little bit and lean into that difficulty, when you have to have those difficult conversations, when there is restructuring and letting go, or is it reminding yourself around what's like the valuable impact of your work? Is it reminding yourself around your purpose, and that this is just reframing that situation in your mind that helps you get through it? Some people have gratitude practices. They try to appreciate certain elements within their lives or within their organizations or their teams, express that appreciation to get them through those difficult realities. It's just we have to deal with challenging things in life. This is the part of the human struggle. This is part of the leadership struggle. I think it's amplified for leaders. What are some of the ways that you support yourself through those times where, it is a real challenging moment, a stretch of time?
Yeah. One of the things I think that I have to continuously tell myself is it's almost like if this doesn't happen, if this painful thing doesn't happen, it's going to be more painful later. And that helps me to, because I'm so zoomed into this focus. I think I'll give an example of there are various times when I've had to fire somebody for performance issues. And this is always a very challenging conversation. It shouldn't come as a surprise because typically they have been on a performance improvement plan or they've had multiple feedback conversations with their manager. But the time that it is, like the instant that it happens, is always a surprise. Like the decision is not usually the surprise, it's usually the timing. And so for me, I have to think about that of, okay, we've given this person a lot of feedback, a lot of time to improve, and they haven't. So if we keep them, or if we let them continue to have this and let them continue to have this behavior, what does that say to the rest of the org? How does that make other people feel? Because again, we're a team. And so if you have one person who is not potentially pulling their weight, other people have to pick up that weight. And that's harder on them. So this is what I constantly coach managers on, is the perspective of it. Because even when managers are coming to me and saying, I don't know, should I let them go? What do I do? And I talk about, how does this affect the rest of the team? Because it's not just about this one person, although it is very personal because you're going to be severing ties with this one person, but it's really about the entire team that you have and the entire company as well. So if it is a better choice to company, I think we need to have that hard conversation. And then the other side of, I think for me personally as well, I take time and I go on walks. I will read books. I will veg out with TV just to completely close my brain off. Because I think I need that time to basically recoup myself. I'll eat a nice dinner. There's been occasions where I've had to have the termination conversation, and I will talk to my husband like, I just can't make dinner tonight. You want to just go get some dinner? Let's just go get some dinner. Nice dinner, nice glass of wine for family. Like it helps, but just rejuvenates me back.
Yeah, I think it's so important to hear the realness of it, right? Like it affects these challenges that we have to deal with. They affect us in our lives, right? And there's various ways that we can do that we can approach our day-to-day lives to support ourselves. And I think I love this concept of reframing it, going, if I don't have this conversation now, how much worse is it going to get? Is it going to fester? Is it going to grow? Is it going to have impact on other people? And that can help us to just see clearly a little bit of, oh, wow, this is something that needs to happen. And then also, I think looking at what do we need in this moment too. Sometimes we need to protect ourselves as human beings. We need to think about, how do I nourish myself before getting into this conversation, right? How much of this conversation can I have, or do I need other people there with me? I think this is something that I've been noticing coming up a lot. Is we might think that, hey, okay, we're in this leadership position. Okay, we just open ourselves up fully and completely exposed, and we're supposed to handle the most difficult situations. No, sometimes we can close the door, and sometimes we need to do that. And I think personally, is to share, hey, I need a moment. And I've actually been sharing that with my team personally too, where I say, hey, you know what? I've just gone through something quite challenging. I just need some time. And can we revisit this later? And just being quite forthright with that. But then afterwards, how do you sustain yourself? How do you nourish yourself? I think is so important to discuss, because we don't often hear that. I think that's the real deep human element of it. And I know these challenging experiences that we have in our lives can really inform how we show up in the moment. And I know we were speaking about, like, in our last conversation, you had a former boss as well that created a really challenging type of scenario for you. And so, how can we take these challenges, these experiences that we have, and have them inform how we lead today and how we show up today in moments? And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Maybe, if you're okay with it, just what is a defining, like, leadership challenge that you face, and how did that shape how you showed up? And maybe, like, how could others perhaps be informed in how
Yeah.
they can grow from these types of experiences?
Yeah. I've definitely had many like challenging managers over the years and leaders that I've reported to over the years that have shaped like how I am showing up now. I think one of them was very challenging, I think, and intentional, of being very, very specific on how detailed I was. And because I was definitely in the mindset of, let's get everything done fast. And if it's not perfect, it's okay, because we're moving really quickly and let's do it. And they were more methodical. And I was not methodical. And it's still with me today. I think that's the thing, is that it was maybe the communication and the way it was delivered was not the best and not received as well as I wished it could have been. And definitely have emotional scars from that. But on the other side of it, which has taken me many years to process and get to this point, it was not something that like happened over like a year. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Like, this has taken me years to process. I now realize, oh, I get what they were going for. They were trying to tell me to slow down and think more thoroughly about every problem that I'm working on. And I've taken that to heart, and it's been really interesting to see almost a 360 of my life, of now I am instilling a lot of that level of being methodical in my team as well. But I'm trying to do it in a very different, I think it's just a different way, so that it comes off as, this is why we need to do this. And this is why maybe don't do this, but do that. So I think it's been something that has almost reshaped me as a leader. And I think it's actually helped me as a leader too. But it was super painful going through it, because no one wants to get feedback on themselves. And I was young in my career and getting very, very harsh feedback, and had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome, was not sure I was even going to potentially continue on with the career I was going on, because I just didn't know if I was just completely crap at my job potentially. And I got through it. And I think the perseverance side of me was just took over at one point. But I think it helped shape me as a leader. So I think that when I think about the feedback I give to people and like when I give it, I think about how is that going to shape them as well? And can I give it in a way that's going to be effective and maybe not give them those scars that I have too?
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating because I was really curious. Like, how do you balance the benefit of this rigor, but with that the psychological safety for your team? Like, and I think you've shared that's been I think a red thread through this entire our time together is how important it is to consider how our presence, what we're saying, how we're showing up, what we're what we're communicating, the experience that we're creating, how is that being received and could be received by another person? And going through these scenarios that can help us think that through. And when you think about the team formation, forming the culture of an organization that you've spoken about, it really takes that moment of pause of taking the time to really consider what is the experience that we're creating in other people. And there's something that came up in me while I was thinking of, while you were speaking, is this idea. It's called systems intelligence and systems leadership. It could be very complex, but in a nutshell, it says we have our own experience. There are so many other people having their own experience at the same time. When we get put together, the experiences that we have can be shared, and we affect the experience of other people, and they affect us too. And the research is showing the more we become aware of all of that, the more effective our communications are, the more harmonious they are, faster resolution, better productivity, performance, collaboration. And I'm just really grateful for you sharing a lens into how you do that and also how to foster that within an organization. And, you know, what advice, now that we're coming to the tail end here, like what advice would you give to other leaders who are navigating like a super high growth phase where they might feel, I don't have time for this, right? And what will come up for you around that?
Oh, I don't have time for this gets me, I think, because if you don't have time for this, who does? Like, that's what I would ask almost immediately on that end, because I think from the leader side of it, it all comes down to prioritization. If you're not prioritizing this experience and how you're going to treat people, how you're going to build the company, and if you're not intentional about it, who, number one, who's going to do it? But then also, you're potentially going to create this hodgepodge culture where one team is potentially working effectively, but another team is struggling and no one knows why either one's happening. It's going to be disgruntled. You're going to have a lot more turnover and have less productivity. So there's so many, I just think, long-term disasters that you're avoiding if you work on it now. So spend the time now to do it. And then the other, I guess the good side of that is that you spend a little bit of additional time, the foundational side, the cleanup phase, or just is more of a maintenance phase. You're not having to clean up a big disaster that happens, which I don't know. To me, that's the way I would like to work more. Is I'd rather spend some time up front and get the foundation, get every working style, be very intentional, and then just tweak here and there.
Amazing. How can our listeners connect with you or to follow your work?
I do post opinions on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to have them follow me on LinkedIn. I do really love connecting with people there. And I also do networking conversations throughout the year too, trying to get to know just new people and new perspectives.
Oh, fantastic. We'll make sure to put your LinkedIn handle into the description. Anybody that's listening, please do follow Jen. She's got a lot of great posts that you can be informed by. And Jen, thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your stories and strategies, and just providing us with an inside lens to how you see the world. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, Michael.
So this brings us to the end of another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. For more insights into the inner strategies and approaches of leaders, stay tuned for our next episodes. Subscribe, comment, share, and I'll see you on the next one.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights, join the conversation, and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.